Hello and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the program that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Amarachi Ubani. On the program this week, U.S. President unveils a 20-point Gaza peace plan as the conflict nears its second year, plus Russia steps up its bombardment of Ukraine. In Gaza, hundreds of thousands of displaced families are once again fleeing south along the coastal road, exhausted and desperate as Israel's military campaign intensifies in Gaza City. Now, against this backdrop, the United States has unveiled a 20-point peace plan, welcomed by many global leaders as the war approaches its 2-year mark.
Families describe an ordeal of repeated displacement, walking for hours on foot or paying thousands of dollars for scarce transport south toward Al-Mawasi. With no tents, food, or water, many say they have nowhere left to go.
We fled Jabalia camp with nothing, no clothes, no bedding. Our tent was hit, and we left with nothing.
As thousands of families are being forced to leave the horrors of what is happening in Gaza City, they are moving here along the coastal road towards Al-Mawasi and Deir al-Balah in the south of the Gaza Strip. Families are talking about the absolute nightmare that they're enduring on this journey. Children walking hours without shoes, mothers trying to protect children from getting lost or hurt in the chaos of this journey. UNICEF is here. We have a reception centre that is providing families with mental health support, trying to reunite unaccompanied children, giving them water. But it is a really, really big mass movement of people at the moment to an unknown in the south, where even more humanitarian support is going to be required.
With 1 million people ordered to evacuate Gaza City, the UN says only 18% of the Strip is not under evacuation orders or militarized zones. UNICEF has 11,000 tents and tarpaulins waiting to enter, but says aid is blocked.
It's important that we get that ceasefire and that we get aid flowing in, not only to prevent the famine that continues to move to the south, but also to make sure that children and families are sheltered as we look at the winter coming and temperatures dropping, which will create a whole different range of issues, including health issues for children and their families. UNICEF, we do have the urgent needed tents. We have 11,000 tents waiting to get in, and over 7,000 tarpaulin sheets that are waiting to get in to help supporting these displaced populations that are going to the south, to help them set up temporary shelters. And we're not being able to get those supplies in. So it just shows how the conditions in terms of logistics and facilitation of aid continue to be very, very poor.
As this humanitarian catastrophe unfolds, American President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced a 20-point peace plan.
Beautiful day, potentially one of the great days ever in civilization. Things that have been going on for hundreds of years and thousands of years. We're at a minimum very, very close, and I think we're beyond very close. And I want to thank Bibi for really getting in there and doing a job. We've worked well together, as we have with many other countries, both of us, with many other countries, which is the only way this whole situation gets solved. And I'm not just talking about Gaza. Gaza is one thing, but we're talking about much beyond Gaza. The whole deal, everything getting solved. It's called peace in the Middle East. So today is a historic day for peace, and Prime Minister Netanyahu and I have just concluded an important meeting on many vital issues, including Iran, trade, the expansion of the Abraham Accords, and most importantly, we discussed how to end the war in Gaza, but it's just a part of the bigger picture, which is peace in the Middle East. And let's call it eternal peace in the Middle East.
Mr. President, when our two countries stand shoulder to shoulder, we achieve the impossible. Just a few months ago, in Operation Rising Lion and Operation Midnight Hammer, we struck a decisive blow against Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. Your bold decision to send those B-2s made the region safer and the world safer. Now, under your leadership, we're taking the next step to win the war and expand the peace. Your plan is consistent with the 5 principles my government set for the end of the war and the day after Hamas. Everybody asks, what is your plan for the day after Hamas? Here's our plan. Passed it in the cabinet. All our hostages, both those who are alive and those who died, all of them will return home immediately. Hamas will be disarmed. Gaza will be demilitarized. Israel will retain security responsibility, including a security perimeter for the foreseeable future. And lastly, Gaza will have a peaceful civilian administration that is run neither by Hamas nor by the Palestinian Authority. If Hamas agrees to your plan, Mr. President, the first step will be a modest withdrawal, followed by the release of all our hostages within 72 hours. The next step will be the establishment of an international body charged with fully disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza.
The U.S. plan calls for an immediate ceasefire, release of hostages and detainees, full aid access, and temporary governance of Gaza by a technocratic Palestinian committee under an international board of peace chaired by President Trump.
Ending lawfare against Israel at the ICC, the ICJ.
However, Prime Minister Netanyahu swiftly ruled out Palestinian statehood, saying the IDF would remain in Gaza.
I think we should understand that we're giving everybody a chance to have this done peacefully, something that will achieve all our war objectives without any further bloodshed. But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done. We prefer the easy way, but it has to be done. All these goals must be achieved because we didn't fight this horrible fight, sacrificed the finest of our young men to have Hamas stay in Gaza and threaten us again and again and again with these horrific massacres.
Regional leaders from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, and others praised the deal, saying it should open a path to a two-state solution. The Palestinian Authority called the effort sincere as UN officials condemned Israel's settlement expansion in the West Bank, calling it a threat to any future Palestinian state.
Israeli settlement expansion continues accelerate alongside the proliferation of outposts and steps in the Israeli Knesset promoting the annexation of the West Bank. Israeli settlements have no legal validity and constitute a flagrant violation of international law and resolutions. They are systematically shrinking the territory of the Palestinian state and further entrenching Israel's unlawful occupation. The advancement of the EU1 plan is a calamitous development. If implemented, it would effectively sever the connection between the northern and southern West Bank, further undermining the contiguity of an independent and sovereign Palestinian state, increasing risk of forced displacement, and fueling tensions.
Palestine will not disappear, but every day, children, women, men, entire families disappear. Communities are uprooted. Neighborhoods are turned to dust. Lives are shattered. Land is grabbed. Homes are demolished. This is the dark reality of life in Palestine under Israel's illegal occupation.
For displaced families, however, the immediate reality remains survival, overcrowded shelters, disease risks, and an unending cycle of flight, waiting to see if diplomacy abroad can bring relief on the ground.
In Ukraine, residents are reeling from one of the heaviest Russian bombing raids in months. Nearly 600 drones and close to 50 missiles pounded Kyiv and other cities overnight, killing at least 4 people on Sunday. The barrage lasted some 12 hours, with hours of non-stop explosions in the capital at dawn.
Emergency crews deployed across Kyiv following a wave of overnight strikes that left multiple buildings destroyed in the capital. In the village of Chernechchina, rescuers pulled the bodies of an entire family, 2 children and their parents, from the rubble of their home. Ukraine's Air Force said it intercepted 46 of 65 drones launched overnight on Sunday, but nearly 20 made direct hits across 6 regions.
From Ukraine, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that over the weekend, several parts of the country came under massive attacks, resulting in multiple civilian casualties and widespread destruction. Several children were among the casualties. This is what local authorities are telling us. The capital, Kiev, along with Zaporizhia city and the Kiev region, were among the most severely impacted. The World Health Organization reported that a strike yesterday on a cardiology facility in Kiev killed a health worker and a patient. In frontline areas, the regions of Donetsk and Kherson continued to be heavily affected, and strikes on energy infrastructure in the regions of Chernihiv, Zaporizhia, and Vinnytsia disrupted the electricity supply as temperatures are dropping.
In recent weeks, Russia has intensified its aerial assaults on Ukraine, regularly launching hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles. Ukraine has long been urging its Western allies to provide it with enough advanced air defense weaponry to be able to cope with almost daily Russian strikes.
Each day, Russia kills our people, destroys our cities, and leaves no sign it will ever return to the principles of the UN Charter. That is why today, with Britain, with France, and already with more than 30 nations in our coalition of willings, we are building a new security architecture. We count on the United States of America as a backstop. Real security guarantees must become the line Russia cannot cross again. Here is one example of how strength can stop war. If we could strengthen our skills with a joint system to shut down skies, with a short system to shut down Russian missiles and drones, it would force Russia to stop its attack from the sky. Because everything could be shut down, and so Putin would be forced to sit here or in another respectable venue and look for a truce on the ground. If there is no war in the sky, Russia can't keep fighting on the ground.
On Tuesday, the European Commission announced an agreement with Ukraine to allocate €2 billion to ramp up drone production.
We need to provide military assistance to Ukraine. If we continue to believe that Ukraine is our first line of defense, we have to step up the military assistance to Ukraine. Therefore, concretely, we have agreed with Ukraine that a total of €2 billion will be spent on drones now.
Meanwhile, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged both sides to pursue a sustainable ceasefire.
3.5 years into this war, our position remains clear, principled and consistent: to respect and protect civilians, to mitigate the regional and global impact of the conflict, and to uphold the UN Charter.
US President Donald Trump and Europe have been leading efforts to end the war, but Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly rejected calls for a ceasefire.
The president is a very patient man. He's very committed to peace, but his patience is not infinite. And as he has said repeatedly, he has before him the opportunity and the options of imposing additional economic costs on the Russian Federation if necessary.
Kyiv and its allies accuse the Russian president of stalling tactics as his troops continue making slow progress on the battlefield, despite the reporting of very high combat casualties.
When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, in India, one entrepreneur is turning banana waste into sustainable leather, an innovation that's just won her a UN award. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. In Syria, thousands displaced from Suwaida province are enduring desperate conditions 2 months after deadly clashes forced them from their homes. Many now shelter in makeshift camps or on the streets near Damascus, as the UN warns the country's humanitarian crisis remains among the worst in the world.
Displaced people from Suwaida are struggling to survive in makeshift camps outside Konaitra. Footage shows families in worn-out tents with few basic supplies.
When we were displaced, we fled from Suwaida and came here. As you can see, our tents are in terrible condition. Our children have not enrolled in school. The school year started 3 days ago, and they don't even have proper clothes.
ولا عندنا يعني والله الخيام تعبانه داخل شنو الوضع والله معيشتي من جلد الموت الصعب.
Our life now is worse than death. I would rather die than continue living like this. Life has lost all meaning. We have no home and no livelihood.
The UN estimates 190,000 people have fled Suwaida, many to Dara, Konaitra, and Damascus. In the Damascus countryside, families say they have been forced from shelter schools and left sleeping on the streets.
Neither the Syrian state nor organizations have provided any housing. Families arrived after days on the road and were first taken to Harjala housing, but expelled the next day. Those houses are uninhabitable.
The transitional government, backed by the US and Jordan, has proposed a roadmap for Suwaida, but many displaced families have rejected it, demanding to return home. Meanwhile, the UN warns more than 70% of Syria's population still needs aid, with millions displaced internally and abroad.
Syria urgently requires international material assistance on a scale commensurate with its needs and ambition. We need to see the private sector's footprint back in Syria, including through nurturing Syria's domestic private sector to ensure that what exists survives and thrives. To achieve this will require more support from the region and the wider international community, and sustained sanctions and export control relief, reassurances to banks and companies, and an accelerated path of domestic reforms. It also, of course, requires political stability.
Syria remains, by any metric, one of the largest humanitarian emergencies globally. More than 70% of the population still need some form of humanitarian aid. More than 9 million people are acutely food insecure, and some 7 million people are displaced internally. More than 4 million are refugees in neighboring countries.
Syria is one of the world's largest displacement crises, with over 13 million people uprooted since 2011. A government transition in late 2024 prompted more than 500,000 Syrians to return from abroad and 1.2 million displaced people to go back to their communities. But children in particular still face severe hardships from ongoing hostilities, repeated displacement, health emergencies, and the 2023 earthquake's aftermath.
8 years after fleeing mass violence in Myanmar, more than 1 million Rohingya refugees remain stranded in Bangladesh. Most of them are children. The camps of Cox's Bazar, home to nearly 1 million people, now face severe funding shortages after the US cut foreign aid in 2024 and in 2025, further deepening the plight of one of the world's most persecuted minorities.
Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, home to the world's largest refugee settlement. Here, more than 1 million Rohingya live in limbo 8 years after fleeing what the UN once called a textbook case of ethnic cleansing. 500,000 children have grown up here, born into exile. As a UN summit held in New York, Rohingya refugees rallied, demanding a safe and dignified return.
We don't want to stay in refugee camps even a minute longer. Our demand is that our rights, our dignity and our safety be guaranteed, and we want to return to our country. We don't want to stay in Bangladesh anymore. Please arrange for us to be sent back quickly.
But with Myanmar still in turmoil and aid budgets shrinking, their future remains uncertain. At the UN summit, officials urged urgent action and warned that funding cuts have left even survivors of violence without critical support.
Drastic cuts in international funding means essential services, from education to food to healthcare, are being cut when they are needed most. An estimated 1.1 million survivors of gender-based violence were left without critical support. This should put us to shame. This desperation is entirely preventable.
Despite the generosity of donors, the reality is that the needs of the Rohingya in Bangladesh are outpacing resources at an alarming rate. The 2025 Joint Response Plan for the Rohingya humanitarian crisis is currently only 37% funded. This is already having dire consequences for the Rohingya in camps, with critical cuts to their food rations and a sharp decline in access to education.
Rights advocates say accountability for crimes in Myanmar is essential.
Ending impunity is the only way to end atrocities. Therefore, international community must end this impunity that is at the root of all atrocities. Perpetrators of atrocities against civilians must be held accountable. Justice is not optional. It is the only deterrent, the only path to peace.
Myanmar needs to respect in full the provisional measures imposed by the International Court of Justice to protect Rohingya lives. And there needs to be full accountability for the grave violations and abuses committed by the military, the Arakan army, and other parties. I repeat my call for the Security Council to refer the whole situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court.
Refugees still rely entirely on humanitarian aid for food, water, shelter, and healthcare. But with aid funding shrinking and instability inside Myanmar deepening after the 2021 coup, their future remains bleak.
And finally on the program, from one crop waste to couture, an Indian entrepreneur is turning discarded banana stems into sustainable leather. The breakthrough has just earned her recognition as a 2025 UN Young Champion of the Earth.
Once a banana plant fruits, its stem is cut down. Globally, that creates more than 100 million tons of waste each year. At her factory in Kolkata, Janali Modi transforms those discarded stems into banofi leather, a plant-based alternative to animal hides.
So we're tackling two global problems. The first is that the materials of today are extremely damaging to the world. So we are creating new materials that will replace many of the existing polluting materials like leather. plastics, and more.
Unlike traditional leather, Banofi uses no toxic tanning chemicals and consumes 90% less water. It also tackles two global problems: polluting materials like plastics and leather, and crop waste.
We're tapping into banana crop waste, which is a really rich cellulosic material, to create new materials. We started with our first product, which is Banofi leather, a plant-based leather from banana crop waste. And we're using this cellulose from banana crop waste to replace materials across multiple different sectors.
Since launching in 2021, Banofi has piloted with over 150 brands, including Mercedes-Benz, and provided new income streams for small farmers in India.
We want to reimagine the materials of the future by using bio-based, plant-based, natural ingredients so that we create materials that aren't resource-intensive in the world, that result in massive carbon emission reduction compared to conventional materials. They will biodegrade and they'll go back to the earth.
Last week, Modi was named a 2025 Young Champion of the Earth by the United Nations Environment Programme. The recognition comes with funding, mentorship, and a global platform to scale the idea.
And that's the program today. Remember, you can catch up on all our top stories and more on channelstv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Bye for now.